Deciding if a vulnerability that we have found has a certain risk level can be a hard thing to do. While there are many options available, from words to traffic light systems, the most commonly used risk calculator is the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. The Common Vulnerability Scoring System, more widely known as the abbreviation CVSS, allows us to assign a risk score to vulnerabilities in a standardized manner. Created in 2004 by the National Infrastructure Advisory Council in collaboration with various security experts from different organizations including Cisco, CERT and Symantec, CVSS had several versions, each one improving upon the lessons learned by the previous version. Currently we are at version 4.0. Even though 3.1 is still very common, we will walk through the 4.0 version in this video. CVSS 4.0 assigns the score based on 5 key metric groups. The base score forms the core of the vulnerability assessment, evaluating the basic attributes of a security flaw. The base score is comprised out of 2 sets of metrics, exploitability and impact metrics. The exploitability metric calculates how easy it is to exploit the vulnerability. The impact metrics calculate the direct impact of successful exploitation. The supplemental group is used to take into account real-time factors such as exploit availability, recovery chance, and the value of affected systems. These can be used to give more context to the vulnerability. The environmental metric group takes the environment of the vulnerability in mind. It assesses the impact of a vulnerability within a system, considering additional mitigations and configurations tailored to the environment. This metric group is usually filled in by the client. The Environmental Security Requirements metric group allows owners to adjust each attribute based on additional mitigations that were performed in or by the system. Finally, there's the threat metric. This is used to signal the threat to the environment and is also filled out by the client. Let's score a vulnerability together. Before we start scoring, first we need to have an example vulnerability. Imagine we have found a critical vulnerability in a widely used Bluetooth protocol. This vulnerability enables remote attackers to easily execute arbitrary code on Bluetooth-enabled devices, without the need of user interaction, and the code runs as the same user as the Bluetooth stack, which is root. Let's assign a CVSS score to it. Most of the time we use a calculator for it to make it easier. You can find the calculator on first.org. Make sure to select the 4.0 and not one of the older versions. When we look at the calculator, it seems very complicated, but in reality it's quite easy. There's detailed documentation on how to calculate a score, or if we're lazy, we can just mouse over the buttons or any of the text of the calculator and it gives us the information we need. Let's get started at the base metrics. Like explained before, these metrics are about the vulnerability itself, without taking into context the environment or any other mitigating features. The first section is the attack vector. This is how the vulnerability is exploited. Network means that it's remotely exploited. Adjacent means that it's on the same protocol, for example NFC or Bluetooth. Local means that the vulnerability is local. This means social engineering attacks, but also through SSH connections. The final option is physical, which the name implies requires physical access. In our example, we have RCE over Bluetooth protocol. While this is a remote attack, and you would think network, the Bluetooth protocol limits the attack range, and because of it we select adjacent instead. The next section is attack complexity. This means how hard it is to take advantage of the vulnerability. Low means that it's not complex and has no extra actions that need to be taken to abuse the vulnerability. High means that the vulnerability needs to have other information to exploit, for example circumvention of address space or execution limitations. Our example exploit is of low complexity, because we don't need to bypass any security features for the code to work. Attack requirements apply if there's anything special that is needed for the attack to happen. This can be anything on the system or in an environment that needs to be prepared for attack to function. For example, starting a certain software, race conditions, or if an attacker needs to launch an exploit multiple times to ensure the exploitation, all fall under this section. The example we use has Bluetooth. That could be seen as a requirement, but it's not. Because if our target has no Bluetooth enabled, we can't perform the attack at all. So in our case, we select none. Privileges required are the privileges that an attacker must have to perform the attack. Sometimes access to files or specific resources is needed to exploit a vulnerability. Low means only that the user access is required, and high means that a higher privilege account is required, for example, administrator. Our example does not mention any required privileges, so we can keep this one on none as well. Next is user interaction. This means, as the name implies, if a victim needs to perform any action for the vulnerability to work. If a victim needs to have a piece of software running, then it's a passive interaction. If the victim has to click a button or perform an action, then it's an active interaction. In our case, the attack is over Bluetooth, and one could argue that Bluetooth needs to be turned on, and therefore it's passive. The other argument is that Bluetooth is a system function, and therefore should not be counted as a user interaction. In our case, we will set the user interaction to passive. We should now have our exploitability mapped. Now we can look at the impact metrics. These metrics follow the CIA triad. No, not that CIA. CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These only have three options: none, low, and high. Low impact means that some of the metric can be abused. For example, in confidentiality, some data might be accessed by the attacker. High impact means that all the data can be accessed. Let's start mapping these to the vulnerability we have found. First, confidentiality. We just explained what it does. If we can execute code, then we can get everything we want, so we put it at high. The next one, integrity, means if the data can be trusted after successful exploitation. Low means that random data can be changed, but with a remote code execution vulnerability, we can set this to high, since we can control the data that we want to change. Finally, availability. This, as the name implies, is about data availability. If we can disrupt the services, we can score this. Low means that the services can be disrupted periodically, or that it does not completely block the users of the application. Since we have RCE, we could turn the entire server off and deny access, so the availability impact would be high. The next section asks the exact same questions, but it asks it in the context of another system. Can I use the RCA exploit to impact the CIA target on other systems? This can also be all set to high. This is all you need to fill out to get a base metric. In CVSS 3.1, it was very common to only fill in these items. In 4.0, they really want us to fill in the supplemental metrics. So let's fill these in. The first item is the safety metric. This metric is about the IS 61508. This is an international standard how to design, deploy, and maintain secure systems. This generates its own rating number. The low and high metrics refer to those rating numbers. Since this video is not about that standard, we can leave it on non-defined. If you want us to make more videos about topics like CVSS or other cybersecurity standards, press that like button. Just let us know that you like this kind of content. The automatable option asks the question, can this be automated? Can an attacker complete all the steps in the kill chain? If they can, it's a yes, else it's a no. In our example, we can execute code on the device, so in theory we can execute code that would affect all nearby Bluetooth devices. This means we can automate it, so we select yes. The recovery metric describes how large chances of recovering the machine and refers mainly to the availability. Automatic means that the application recovers by itself. User means that a user needs to recover the system. And unrecoverable means that it can't be recovered. The vulnerability does not affect the recovery, since it's just remote code execution. The application that can be launched from the RCE could impact the recovery, but this is about the specific vulnerability. Since we don't have information about the system, we can leave the recovery to non-defined. The value density defines how much value an attacker gets out of attacking that system with a single exploitation. Diffuse means that only a single user is affected. Concentrated means that multiple or administrators are affected. With our RCE, we have a concentrated value density since we have administrator access to the device. Vulnerability response effort metric is a metric that measures how difficult initial response is to the defending party. Here we also have three metrics. Low means that it's trivial and requires better documentation or configuration settings that need to be changed. Moderate means that a minor update might be required or disabling of a subsystem. High means that it would have significant impact or difficult to mitigate, and for example, hardware might have to be replaced. In our example, since the vulnerability is in the Bluetooth stack, we would need to update the driver for it. This puts it in a moderate response effort. The final item in this metric is the provider urgency. This is an additional severity rating that is applied by the vendors of products. This qualitative severity rating can be searched for. The vendor should have this information published or the application is able to supply it. Be aware that most vendors do not have this rating. Since we don't have any rating for this particular exploit, since it's not vendor tied, we can fill in non-defined. This is a section that needs to be filled in by testers. The other sections of the CVSS are filled in by the clients. They can use those settings to reduce the CVSS score based on the environment and remediation efforts. We won't cover these sections in this video. If there's enough interest, we will make a follow-up video to cover those metrics. We hope you learned something. If you did, please leave a comment what you've learned or what would you like to see next. Subscribe and press the like button. It would really help us in the algorithm. Thank you for watching and hack ethically.